As an artist who is also a small business owner, it sometimes feels like you're pulled in two opposite directions, toward creative freedom and artistic expression on one side, and toward business-focused administrative tasks on the other. For most of us in our creative training, whether that was art school or conservatory training or just a liberal arts education, everything was focused on the artsy side of things, with often no mention of business at all. And if you look to business literature or business coaches who cater to small business owners, which we are as creative entrepreneurs, that business material focuses entirely on efficient business administration, and creativity doesn't even enter the picture. Where can the two sides, creative and business, meet? In today's podcast episode, we're going to figure out how these two elements of our creative businesses can and do interact in support of our artistic work. Let's discuss how making decisions to follow our creative passion can actually help us in the business side of our work, forging a virtuous cycle of sustainable creativity. Welcome to the Starving Artist No More podcast, with me, your host, Jennifer Jill Araya. Starving Artist No More is a business coaching community dedicated to helping creative entrepreneurs cast off the starving artist and find thriving fulfillment from their businesses. If you are a creative entrepreneur who wants more from your creative business, if you want to build a thriving business that truly meets your needs and fulfills you holistically, personally, creatively, and financially, if you want to move beyond the harmful starving artist stereotype into a place of abundance, joy, and fulfillment in your creative artistic work, then you're in the right place. I'm so glad you're here. Hello, thriving artists, and welcome to episode 61 of the Starving Artist No More podcast. I'm thrilled that you're here today. This podcast episode features a deep and thought-provoking interview with actor, narrator, and educator Neil Helligers. Neil is going to be a faculty member at the upcoming Thriving Narrators Retreat, which I'm hosting in my hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio, very soon, in just a couple weeks, August 22nd through 25th, 2024. This event is just for the narrators in our creative entrepreneurship community, but it is an event I'm thrilled to be part of. We're going to talk about both the business and the craft of audiobooks, because, as we'll hear in today's conversation with Neil, the business truly does help the craft, and the craft truly does help the business. If you're an audiobook narrator and would like to learn more about the Thriving Narrators Retreat, you can hop on over to my website, starvingartistnomore.com, where you'll find all the details. Registration for the retreat will be open through July 31st, which is still a couple weeks away at the time this episode is initially being published, and we'd love to have you join us. If, on the other hand, you're not an audiobook narrator, or you're listening to this when August 2024 is long past, I still invite you to check out my website and see what coaching opportunities and events I have available. You never know. The exact event or coaching program you need might be coming up soon. That website again was starvingartistnomore.com. Let's turn now to the main topic of today's conversation: how to foster sustainable growth in your creative business so that you are satisfied and fulfilled by your work, both creatively and financially. This is a topic I've discussed here on the podcast before, all the way back in episode 7, when I introduced the concept of working in your creative and financial sweet spot. If you have no idea what that term means, I really encourage you to go back and listen to that episode. I'll link it in the show notes. But a quick description of your creative and financial sweet spot is the place where you are able to do artistic work that you find incredibly creatively fulfilling and enjoyable, and where you're able to earn your best and highest rates. The place where your creative fulfillment intersects with your financial fulfillment is the place that I call your creative and financial sweet spot. The joy of focusing on work in your sweet spot is that it allows you to do your very best work. After all, when you're working on projects that you find creatively engaging and enjoyable, you'll be doing your best work. Every artist is going to be at their very best when they're invested artistically in the work they're doing. And because you're doing your very best work, over time, that creative excellence will be noticed and will be rewarded financially, allowing you to earn higher rates for that work that you so love to do. And when you have the financial peace that comes from knowing your bills are going to be paid, and you're not going to be the starving artist that society expects you to be, you're able to create with more freedom and more innovation, making the quality and originality of your work that much better. It's a delightfully positive and supportive cycle. As I mentioned in the intro to this episode, sometimes it seems like we have to have split personalities in order to be thriving artist business owners. But the concept of the creative and financial sweet spot points out that those two aspects of our business truly can positively influence each other. That's why I was so excited to talk with Neil Helligers for today's podcast episode. Neil's artistic career has been a step-by-step journey of continually allowing his creative interests to prompt him to make business decisions that provide sustainability for him, his family, and his creative enterprise. Neil might not use the term creative and financial sweet spot, but the way he approaches his artistic business absolutely is an embodiment of that concept. I am thrilled that Neil will be a faculty member at the Thriving Narrators Retreat in a few weeks, so that he can share his insight with the attendees at the retreat. And I'm even more excited that he agreed to sit down with me for a chat that I can now share with you right here on this podcast. So, let's take a listen in on the conversation I had recently with Neil Helligers. I am thrilled that I have with me today a good friend and an incredible artist. My guest today is actor and audiobook narrator Neil Helligers. Neil, thank you for joining me for today's conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you, and it's great to be here with you.
Likewise. Neil, I want to start off just sort of by asking a general question about how you've developed your career. You're an accomplished audiobook narrator. You work both on stage and on screen. You have worked as a teacher and a coach in a variety of venues. Can you give me a little bit of a rundown about how you branched into all of those different areas in your creative career and what led you to work with such skill in so many different creative venues?
Well, first, thank you for that assertion of excellence. I appreciate that very much. I guess I was thinking of it more of a sort of a flow of a combination of happenstance and opportunity rather than branching, because I sort of see it like a path that presented itself to me as a result of the choices that I made at different points in my life that led me to seek out certain things that I thought I would either find satisfying and or sustainable as a person in the world, however I connected with the people around me, and what was the sort of the best way for me to accomplish the things I wanted to accomplish in a wider sense of my life, but also artistically, also spiritually, as well as creatively, I guess. My initial path that led me to the place where I started making those choices was actually nothing to do with acting. It was, in a certain sense, spiritual. I went to the college that I went to because at that time I was a senior in high school, granted, but, bigger decisions have been made at younger ages. I thought that I was going to become a rabbi. And so I made my choices about where I wanted to go to college. And based on what was available there for me to study and the path that would present me, very quickly, it kind of became apparent to me that that wasn't exactly the right path. So that led me into a path of theater, which I'd always done. I've been acting since whenever, but that led me into a specific kind of environment where where I was studying theater it was a BA program, was not a BFA program, and so that led me to, while I was getting an excellent academic theater education with some practical aspects, it led me to having to find what other kinds of training and picking up of technique, while also combining it with a very firm kind of early understanding of what technique was. And it begins the kind of journey that I've always sort of followed in terms of the interplay of inspiration, your natural proclivity for things, and the natural way that you connect to things, along with how technique isn't a substitute for that, but is a means for stimulating that or generating that when inspiration is not available. And so in that respect, that led me to doing a semester abroad in London, which was my first major kind of initiation into Shakespeare, which after college, I went to grad school and started working in Shakespeare. And that kind of led into that sort of life. And that also led to me teaching Shakespeare a lot alongside other acting technique. And that flowed into when I was in New York City and kind of starting to think, this is great. I'm enjoying touring around and I'm enjoying working, driving upstate and teaching kids Shakespeare. But there's other things in my life that I need to be fulfilling in terms of what I want, that's aside from my artistic goals, and that namely things like having a family and helping support a family. So that led me to utilizing other things that were available to me at the time in New York City in terms of on-camera work, and that led to something of a proliferation of on-camera commercial work, as well as on-camera some TV work here and there. But oddly, it was the commercial work that lent a different, unexpected kind of inspiration because I'd never done improv and things like that. Commercial on-camera acting is a lot about like taking an entire day to do 30 seconds and finding a million different ways to do it slightly differently and never knowing which one of those is going to be chosen by the powers that be, but always being okay with being in that moment of like, is this right? You didn't seem to think that was right. How is this one right? While not freaking out and coming down on myself and self-destructing in the process, which is something I had to learn as I went along. But it seems like an unlikely place, being a bunch of goofy dads that I was. Like Modern Family was popular. Everyone wanted Phil Dunphy to advertise their products. So that was like, I did that for like a while. But then that also kind of flowed into me being, okay, this is fine, but it's not sustainable in a consistency kind of a way. And that was the thing. Even if I was working what I would call regularly, there was no structure to it. It was always like, what am I doing next week? I'm auditioning for this thing. Will I get it? Will I not? I don't know. And even if I do get it, when exactly will those resources from doing that gig be available to me? Also slightly unsure. And so that led me alongside others while still continuing doing these things to find something that felt, again, that fit my mode of technique and inspiration and training that I already had. And that led me into audiobooks, which I'd always listen to, and all sorts of long drives back and forth between theater festivals and home and things like that, as being another possibility. I couldn't know that at the time, but that began, all those things flowed into that practice and all of that experience of knowing what a multiplicitude of technique, how that was valuable, how there was no one path into anything, but different kinds of ways of approaching it, that certain techniques that I had always held close and had always kind of found inspiration may or may not work in the context of audiobook, or I had to be adapting those techniques, or I had to be supplementing them with new technique. And then also in observing a medium where it was so singular to how every person did it, that even if I listened to so-and-so for inspiration for a dozen books, I had to know that it's not that I would narrate like them, but that I would pluck 5 or 6 different things from the way they worked and see if those matched my technique. If I did a workshop with someone, I would watch them work with 5 different narrators and see them take a different approach. Because the other thing about all of that leading into audiobook that I was doing the entire time was teaching. That's initially was my inspiration behind wanting to be a rabbi. It was about engaging with society in a way that tries to leave it a little bit better than I found it, by taking things that others had given me and redistributing them to other people in a way that would benefit their path and their flow and their life. And this has a lot to do with what I initially learned almost accidentally by the virtue of the theater program I ended up at was this idea of, and this goes back to the Russians with Stanislavski, that he was observing a methodology of teaching and theatrical production that was he found to be stale and manufactured, and it was just like a do it exactly like this kind of a way of performance. And that worked for several hundred years, but he was discovered, and that led to others kind of picking up that ball and running with it in terms of how technique is a substitute for inspiration when it doesn't naturally come, or when you're working and you have to do it and you don't have a choice, no matter how you feel that day, you have to hit a deadline or something like that. So the whole time while I was teaching, and that took on very different forms. Sometimes I was teaching very reluctant children in middle schools who didn't necessarily want to do Romeo and Juliet that morning at 7 a.m., but here we were nonetheless, in combination with students at a summer university program who were very invested in getting a basic background in acting Shakespeare technique. I always found that I learned from teaching, and that was kind of what I was getting. That was the little bit I was getting back to it, aside from it being like a consistent sort of business structure that I engaged in. But all these things led me to always kind of be in a place where like I need to be learning more. I need to be improving my craft. Technique there's no permanency to inspiration, and therefore technique always needs to be kind of continuing the process of finding how are you operating on that day with that work of art that you're channeling at that point in your life, at that time of year, at that time of day, and those are always going to be different. And so audiobooks, because it's so rolling and continuous, because we're working all day, it kind of becomes that flow that I talked about before. It's, I don't know if it's by accident or happenstance or fate or whatever it is, or just the natural organic kind of evolution of what seemed to work best for me. All those streams have arrived at the river that I'm kind of flowing down right now, and I like that I like that I can't see where that river is heading. Like the earth curves and you can't see over the horizon, but I'm grateful for the ride. And part of what I'm excited about is I weirdly, despite all that, I got away from teaching during my audiobook sort of period, the past 10 years or so. I kind of put it aside and kind of was doing a thing. Well, I'm not exercised enough to teach, even though I've been doing that for longer than I had been doing audiobook narration. And it's only just recently that I'm like, okay, I can start to see how I can apply some of this, but not what I know. That's the thing. I think audiobook technique, like any other creative craft, everyone's different. There's no prepackaged educational program. There is a multiplicitude of different approaches and opportunities for techniques or things that you can hand someone and see, does this work? No? Great. Throw it aside. Let's try this one. Okay, that worked for you. Let's see why that worked for you and how that leads us to other points down the stream for you to continue to find that inspiration. And we'll piece something together that works for you. Now, next student in a row, moving down the bench, completely different arrangement. So there's no one way of teaching everybody one way of how to do this. I think that's probably true for most creative practices. I think it's probably true for a lot of things. But if I'm trying to embrace that and get back to, as I'm sort of reintroducing teaching back into my my work, that educational experience that I always got from teaching, I learned more about Shakespeare from teaching those recalcitrant seventh graders than I did sometimes other people, than the ones who were so eager to please, that I'm looking forward to seeing how reintroducing teaching helps me learn more about audiobook narration, and then therefore be able to cycle that back into the community and give back and try to raise I'm just going to keep throwing river metaphors in here. Raise, a rising tide. It's a bit mixed because, some rivers are tidal. That's true. Estuaries are tidal, that rising tide kind of a thing, especially because there are so many more narrators now and so many people looking to find ways to make it work for themselves. That journey of being, what makes you tick? What are the things that excite you? And how can we translate that into creative work? We'll talk about business, but at least for now, that you have a solid foundation of how you operate. What are the mechanics? What is the chemistry? What is the alchemy of you that translate into your best possible performances? Discovering that with each individual and sharing that with the person across the room who's like, yes, that was the technique I needed. Thank you so much. All those things make me excited about that, but also like on a practical level too. I mean, I always thought like, well, aside from all the other gigging, gig life that I was kind of doing, why wasn't I doing more of this? In terms of in terms of coaching and in terms of individual teaching experiences and things like that too. I'm looking forward to seeing how that lends a certain more structure to my work, to my practice, to my career as well too.
For sure. So I'm hearing two really big, strong threads through your entire creative career. One is a commitment to ongoing growth and excellence through that growth, and that growth might look one way in one situation and might look completely different in another situation based on the technique required for that particular project or the amount of inspiration you happen to have that day or whatnot. But throughout all of that, just a true commitment to growing yourself and also growing through sharing that growth with other people, which I think is such a beautiful life philosophy. And then the second thing that I'm hearing that I would love for you to sort of expand a little bit more is that from a business perspective, your decisions have all been based on what is sustainable for you personally and creatively. And I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that. What made some of those decisions sustainable?
I always track the beginning of my audiobook work and my desire to kind of steer into doing work in that vein with the birth of my son. I think that, I always say, like, how long have you been narrating? And it's really been precisely as long as I've had a kid. I have a very specific memory of prepping my first book when he's in the carrier in front of me. And so that moment, it's akin to being like, I need more structure in my life. I need more consistency. I need more dependency on income and things like that. But it clarified for me why I was doing what I was doing. I think earlier on, and I think this happens with a lot of actors, and I think this happens with a lot of creative endeavors, there's this notion of an equivalence of success and, for lack of a better word, fame, notoriety, celebrity, those kinds of things, about being well known. And granted, being well known and having that is a vehicle towards working more. And so that leads back to stability. And I totally get that. What that clarified for me was like, knowing who I was working for, and I was working for that kid in the carrier. That was the reason why I was doing what I was doing, and that was that guided me significantly into being. I need to change up how I'm doing. Like I said, I was working on all these different kind of concurrent streams of work, whether it be live theater or whether it was on-camera commercial or other TV work. But I needed something that wasn't a side gig, but that could connect all those different strains and all those things, and to make that consistent for myself. The people that I talked to about it, and this is, again, this was given that this was about 10 years ago, or really, I should say 11 years ago, the industry was a little bit different back then in terms of availability, but it was still a complete unknown. I still felt like I was starting from scratch, which was scary. And knowing that I was shifting my resources behind the physical materials necessary to build up to physically do the gig in terms of equipment, in terms of the learning curve of what I needed to know about recording and to optimize that aspect of it, the reconnecting with a completely different sector of the industry that was completely new to me, and the time and money that was invested in that. I couldn't have known at the time that it was going to, I think, gratefully be as consistent for me as it has proven to be. And this is not, I don't think this is not unique to creative endeavors, but life does involve a certain amount of risk. I feel like the investment, the kind of casting out of seeing if this is going to work and investing time and money into it was metered out by trying to adopt a practice of I'll only invest more depending on how much I'm able to advance. Like at a certain point out of practice, I was only going to buy more, like a better microphone or better equipment, or to like refit my original booth closet with better foam, better equipment, better things, only based on money that I was earning from it after all of the household needs and expenses were taken care of. I sort of have a line for that. Like, okay, I can redo this aspect. I can get I can improve I can maybe get a different computer or a different whatever, based on only returning that money into it. And that was sort of mitigating the risk to a certain extent. But that was while making choices that I was hoping to be the way to kind of make the edification for myself in the work. I always made a beeline right for sci-fi and fantasy because it's what I knew best. But I also had a very keen understanding that someone pointed out to me earlier on that those are the books that are more likely to work in series. And so that it's not the singular, it's never the singular book, it's the continuance of it, which in my mind, coming out of theater, and being desperate for collaboration as the way this thing worked was like, okay, I'm not just getting a gig, I'm establishing a longer relationship with that author, whether I meet them or not, and that in many ways has proven to be something that has given me the most stability. Because when I view it as a long-term relationship with that author, again, whether I meet them or not, and I've been very blessed to have become very good friends with authors that I've worked for years. And that makes the work better. That that we talk about things and we're like, oh, what's happening this one? Oh, are we going to you're going to try that? Oh, he's like, what do you think about this? I'm like, oh, well, wouldn't it be awesome if? And that collaborative experience can kind of happen. It happens to also be a financial kind of stability because it's perpetuating a long-term income, as well. But also it makes the work healthier and it makes the work better. It makes my work better to know the author. I do a lot of work in game lit and lit RPG, which is a genre that is invested heavily in the mechanics of video games and things and tabletop games. And recently, I don't know why I waited so long to do this. I've been playing online, like gaming with authors that I've worked for years. And it's like we talk about it like it's like golf. Some people, in business, other business endeavors, they play golf, and while they're teeing off, they're playing the game that they're physically doing, but they're also talking about other things. It's a vehicle or a conduit for strengthening those relationships. And I don't know why we waited so long to do this, but it's also fun. I also enjoy it. But it also, like I said, I think it makes the work better. So it's the marriage of the things that make me tick, like in this case, sci-fi fantasy, the thing that I enjoy, the things I know I'm automatically more enthusiastic about, combined with the acting technique that I had that, is useful for things like I had a particularly great voice teacher in grad school. And one of the things that he taught, for just as one example, so many great sort of foundational basic vocal technique in terms of the kind of sustainability that we need for audiobook work. But the way he taught accents and dialects, and this is not necessarily a unique approach, but it's what he left me with, was not just about having like a dozen or a half dozen or whatever back pocket accents that you can pull out like reliably, like your RP or German, whatever it is. It was more about how do you learn a new accent in a reasonable amount of time and then drop it into your work while still sounding like a human being. That was always his bottom lines. Like, that sounds perfect. That's technically correct, but you sound like you don't sound like a human. You sound like a caricature. So obviously that has served me in lots of different ways and lots of different books that require accents, but also for sci-fi and fantasy, it's often about creating a whole dialect for a culture that does not exist or that is analogous to one that we know, but just slightly different. And so when I have that conversation of after I finish my prep and I'm seeing okay, so we have the northern continent and the southern continent here. Do you think this is more analogous to Scots and then down here we're southern England? Does that work for you or not? Or are there other, there was an invasion from the West? Well, those accents would creep into as well too. So you'd have a continuity of it, So it's that sci-fi fantasy, and obviously that works for real world, even for urban fantasy, which tends to be more specific in terms of actual real world accents. But that confluence of all that work I had done previously as for stage work fed directly into it. But that is a technique that is becoming a solid practice that leads to continuity in continuing the business practice of that particular genre as it feeds into the sustainability of my audiobook work. So it's a creative thing. It's a technical element. It's having invested the time and resources to have gone to grad school and taken that time out to study those things, combined with an understanding, a growing understanding of the industry that I was introducing myself into, to find those sustainable continuing opportunities to make that work and to, therefore kind of be oh, this is a person who works well in this genre. Perhaps myself as an author will approach this person to work as well too. So they all kind of connect. It's, there's a lot of things about auditions and things like that work. That's true for any of these creative endeavors, whether it's, I think, acting or audiobook or something else, where you have to find a way to get into the room. But if you can't deliver once you are in the room, you're not going to, you may not get the gig. You might, who knows? These things are really wholly unpredictable in the end. But you increase your odds of getting the work by having the material and having the experience and having the ability to land the gig. But to get to that room, is a different endeavor and is a different practice. But then to get into the next room and the next room and the next room is a matter of how those things combine and lend opportunity and probabilities to the next opportunities coming along to do the same thing again, and so on and so forth.
Sure. I'm hearing you say that you start with your creative interest and learn the techniques that will help you grow in that creative interest, and use the two of those things together to make sustainable business choices.
Yeah.
And then when you get in that situation in the business that you're able to show off that creative and that technical ability and passion, that's what helps you get to the next business choice and the next business choice and the next business choice. I love that virtuous cycle. I think that's truly a beautiful thing, and how creative businesses are supposed to work.
Yeah, it's the creativity is it's not like a happenstance that occurs like alongside it. It directly pushes you, and it is the thing that you apply. Your creativity in a creative career is your engine. It's the thing that will keep you going. And how do you set up that engine? Well, ideally keep you from burning out. Because you set up guidelines and, and protections to yourself as you kind of go along. Hopefully, ideally, I've been better and worse about doing that as my career has gone on. But at least for me, that's how I've found a way of kind of moving along in a way that it feels sustainable. But at the same time, I'm also very conscious of like I said before, these days I've been doing a lot of game lit RPG. In terms of my recording schedule, it's probably about 80%. Of course, I love to do literary fiction, and of course, I love to do nonfiction. All these other genres as well too, and or a poetry gig which comes along every so often to me, kind of randomly. And I always kind of do want to do more of those things. But I have found that my sustainability really rests in what I've built with a lot of indie authors. And so again, it's a little bit more about these direct relationships, mostly because of a happenstance of the genre I've chosen to specialize in isn't one that is, there are very few opportunities within traditional publishing for those genres. And as much as, we'd all love to work trad, but my sustainability has been working indie. And I appreciate that, and I love that. Like I said, I cherish those relationships that I've developed over the years and the work that I've done. My feeling has always been like, try to find the literary fiction in this game. Try to find the nonfiction elements that really teach us things about our world as they are found contained within this fantasy world, because of the analogous relationship. Like any good book or a lot of the game that I really love. Yeah, it's taking place in a completely imaginary world, but all of the lessons therein about society and about power and about love and all these different topics are all contained within there, and they're all real world topics. You can, and so I always try to find that real, like my voice teacher, no matter how outlandish, crazy, weird this world is, I'm always trying to find the human being inside of that. And because that's what I'm relating to on a technical, creative inspiration level. And I'm filtering that through. This is like Stanislavski one-on-one. It's the as if you're in that situation, regardless of whether it's because you got to beat the dragon. We all in our lives have to beat that dragon at some point or another, and we all go into that being like, I can't beat dragons. Are you absurd? That's This is all, and this leads me to think of this thing I always talk about. Like this, I think this is a topic that has been well trod. This is not unique to me about imposter syndrome. And I think this might be generational. Maybe not, or maybe our parents' generation just never talked about it or didn't have the means to talk about it. But I'm a big believer in weaponizing my imposter syndrome to make it be that no matter what I've done, no matter how many books, whatever it is, whatever other things, I'm always kind of thinking like, man, I'm not that great. I'm always kind of thinking I'm confident in my abilities. At the same time, I can recognize that I've worked hard, but at the same time, I would always really rather be coming from a place of like, that wasn't great. I need to do better. Or what am I doing here? How did I'd always rather come from that position, because I think that always keeps me, this is the weaponization of it, that always keeps me trying to work harder to improve. And to be listening to work that I did a year ago and be like, okay, I can see there's some parts of that I really like. This, and this, however, that needs to change. And never be sitting back on those things, but always looking to be improving, and without being self-deprecating about it, while being intensely critical of myself at the same time. It's a weird contradictory blend sometimes, but it's part of what I found works for me, to always be endeavoring to do more, work harder, better, not just harder, but also better, and to try to make the whole thing more sustainable in a way that's like, get over yourself, take the gig. You don't love the book, but that's fine. You're gonna find that literary fiction element in there that in chapter 4 that you're gonna really love, and that's gonna be the reason why you love doing this book. You're gonna find a voice in there that maybe isn't something that the author necessarily intended, but is a suggestion that you made, and it led to a great collaboration that in book 4 will be written in, and book 5 will be written in. And so because you have that creative collaboration with that author who you met on Discord or whatever, you are in a position to do that. So those opportunities that would, not necessarily be like, that would come along and be like, okay, this is just fine, but this is going to be sustainable. This is going to add to my sustainability. I'm going to find the thing in there that is going to give me some degree of artistic satisfaction, but it's also is going to allow me to complete the gig satisfactorily, and hopefully make it successful enough that the author has the funds to do book 4, book 5, book 6. Sometimes or to fund at least the audiobook, not to write the book, but to at least have again, because it's an independent, it's usually coming from the author itself. So they need to feel successful along with me. The book needs to be successful enough to justify book 5, book 6, book 7, book 15, and so forth.
For sure. Yeah, that reframing of how you're thinking about a project creatively so that you can find what does creatively fulfill you is a very powerful mindset, I find.
It's the same mindset that's like, you get in early in the morning and you're like, I'm not, my head's not here today. Sometimes it is good, to be like, you know what, I'm going to take an hour and I'll come back. But we don't sometimes have the luxury of that in our lives. And so that same finding a place to either physically warm up or mentally warm up in it, to be like, you know what, I don't have a choice. I need to get this done today. I'm going to make it happen. I'm not going to phone it in. I'm not going to do it on automatic. I'm going to dip into something, whether it's technical or personal or inspirational, in order to make it happen, is a necessary part of what we do, especially for audiobook, because we have to be producing all the time, in order to have a lined up kind of schedule that makes sense sustainably. We can sometimes take an hour off or even half a day off. I've certainly done that many times, but more often than that, I have to be like, no, I'm going to make this work. And that's when I turn to my what I've learned technically, in order to, if I'm not feeling physically there, about what am I lacking right now? What aspect of my vocal apparatus do I need to warm up a little bit more? Oh, I can feel that my top register isn't there for my female characters. What technique can I go back to? What additional warm up can I do that I know particularly warms up those areas of resonance that I can activate, so I can juice that part of me, so I can go back into the scene with a little more fluency and a little more ability to make it happen, and kind of get past my own block about this character isn't working today. Because it's oftentimes not this character at this moment isn't working. That's an externalization. It's really like, I'm not making this happen. So what can I reconfigure for the time being in order to hopefully arrive at a place where I can make that happen and not let it not happen to me passively. I'm the captain of the ship, as it were. And if I need to build a bilge pump in the middle of the day, that's what I'm going to have to do in order to get to the deadline, so that I can finish the book, so I can upload it, and then so I can go on vacation, or whatever,
Sure.
yeah. Or make dinner, whatever, on a given day.
As the case may be. I saw an anecdote recently of Neil Gaiman, and I do not know whether this is accurate or not. It was like sort of one of those memes that you see, that Neil Gaiman's rules for himself is that he has a set time that is his writing time every day. And during that time, he doesn't have to write, but he has to be sitting in front of his computer with his writing program, whatever program he uses, open on that computer. And he is not allowed to do anything other than be there with that writing program open on his computer. He can't open anything else up. He can't, get up and go someplace else. And it's that idea of making the inspiration happen by being physically in the space where the inspiration comes.
I heard that reminds me of a similar anecdote. I don't know if this is true or not, but I think Norman Mailer, the writer, there's problematic aspects to him, but whatever. But legend has it that his apartment in New York City, which I think was sold recently, I saw the sort of follow up to it. He had like a writing loft, and there was a rope ladder or a ladder of some kind up to the writing loft. So every day when he went to write, he had to climb up this ladder, this rickety kind of ladder, to get up into the writing space. And then he would kind of similar thing. He would be there and then have to take the ladder back down. What I take away from that is that kind of like it's a precarious process getting to that creative space, but you do it every day. You make that your practice when you have to. And I think that's true. I mean, audiobook happens to be an artistic endeavor where we do work and produce every single day. It's not as true for a lot of other creative endeavors. But I always think about, and this is something that my grad school teachers always talked about, were professional instrumentalists like violinists and the like, and Olympic athletes, that they weren't competing all the time. Nor were they performing, a symphony all the time. But violinists play for hours and hours every day. And you know this. Exactly right. Yeah. For hours, and they have to. Professional athletes have to work all the time, and they do this amount of work. I'm holding my hands up and giving amount of space for those listening at home. And this, and this is true for, I think, for theater and a lot of other endeavors where you have rehearsal time. And then performance time is this much smaller sliver. I draw my hands together to indicate the much smaller time. For audiobook, it's the same. It's that same chunk all the time, and so it makes us think that if we're recording for 7 or 8 hours a day, surely that's enough, And it's a weird inversion because a little sliver of talking with a colleague about how they're setting up their schedule, about some new things that they're trying in terms of keeping an open mind about scheduling, or some particular aspect of some vocal technique, or some kind of other vocal sustainability practice. That's the small sliver that we use to fill the big chunk. And so, that leads to all sorts of things about like trying to prevent burnout in a different way because we're producing rather than rehearsing. But at the same time, it's like it's a management skill that feeds the engine that you're driving off of in the first place. That is unique to audiobook because we're making product all the time, and it's easy to get lost in that as being. I think that's what lends to burnout a lot of the times because you don't have that luxury of rehearsing 5 or 6 times in a consequence-free environment. Like you do for theater, for example, before you show the product, where it's incumbent upon us to deliver almost immediately after we do our prep and things like that. That's our marathon, and it's something that I've come to in the way of like finding the technical foundation and the creative inspiration to make that kind of mode of practice work on a continuous level it's different all the time, and again, this goes to why there's no one technique that works for you all the time. You need 5 or 6 different sets of technique to turn to at different moments when techniques 1 through 4 aren't working for you, But this is why or I'm trying to expand ones because I've like scheduling one, for example. This year is the first time in like maybe 4 or 5 years I felt that I've finally hit a good balance in terms of workload that is consistent, that is sustainable, but isn't killing myself, and while also taking time for life and for family and for and for other things that feed me that make that sustainability possible. But it took a really long time to arrive there. It took a lot of listening to the way that other people were working and seeing, does that work for me? Does that work for me? Does that work for my scheduling methodology to arrive at it? But it's part of what feeds me. This is obviously in many ways a solo kind of endeavor, but we have a big resource are the creatives that are all around us all the time that have such great ideas about how they're doing it. And not every practice works for everyone, but plucking up those ones that work for ourselves and adopting them and seeing if they work. And if they do, great. If they don't, great. We'll find some other things. Is a huge resource that I rely upon as well too. So
I love that. Well, believe it or not, we're actually at our final question. This conversation has just flowed in so many amazing, delightful ways. I can't believe that we need to wrap it up.
River Anthology keeps on.
Right,
yes.
Exactly. Yeah. But I would love for you to share, Neil, some tip or resource that you use or a tool that you use in your creative work that is part of what helps make you awesome at what you do.
The way I always think about tools is that you a tool and to a certain extent a resource is only useful to you when you've taken the time to learn how to use the tool. For example, like for dialect work, there's the IDEA website, International Dialects website. Now, that is only a resource. And if you don't know, for those listening don't know what that is, it's just basically a regional kind of database of accents and dialects from different places. And the way they set it up is that it's the same phrase said by all these different people. And within that phrase is contained, it's sort of a nonsense phrase about gooses and things like that. It contains all of the phenomes, all of the different kind of composites of that particular region's accent or dialect. Now, if you don't already know what to listen for, if you don't already know what's that ow sound or the oo sound, okay, that's what they're doing for this accent. Or what was that? How did they do that consonant? Is that a glottal T or not? You have to have done that kind of background work in order for that tool to be useful. So in one sense, that's a specific tool that I would recommend for people to know and how to use, because I think that's a lot more practical for me on the fly sometimes than YouTube accent challenge videos, which can be more comprehensive and for a sense of musicality and are always good to kind of enhance whatever it is. But if I need to do that right quickly, it's trusting in the moment that the work that I have done will be there for me and won't simply vanish. And when I need to apply it in that moment, it'll be there for me. And how productive it'll be or not depends on a lot of other factors. But I guess the tip is to know that if you've worked hard, if you've done the work, if you put in the hours, if you've scraped your knuckles a few times, that's all for a good reason, and it'll be there for you when you need it to be there. But there's a lot of trust involved in that, and so I guess I'm kind of circling around it a little bit. But the tip is to trust how hard you've worked, and to know that it's all there. And sometimes it doesn't come quite as easily. Sometimes the inspiration of it doesn't make that connection, and whether or not you have a technique to bridge that connection or not, it depends on a lot of other things. But it's all there. That's kind of the thing about what we know about our brains and how amazing they are. Everything you've done, it's in there somewhere. And the tip is to find ways for yourself to access it, or to find 5 ways to access it, and trust that one of those 5 will work for you. And whether you supplement that with a website that has a certain amount of information that you can find, or whether it's a friend you're talking to about it who offers a perspective that inspires you or offers you something practical, you'll get there. Trust that you'll get there. And oftentimes that's 75% of the game is that trust and allowing that to happen for yourself and allowing that to come, allowing you to do the work to your own satisfaction in order to keep doing the work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, words to live by as a creative. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. And I cannot wait to hear more of what you have to share at the Thriving Narrators Retreat in August.
I'm really looking forward to the Thriving Narrators. We have a meeting in a few weeks, and I'm looking forward to seeing what everyone else is doing too. Because again, that's like what I love about what we're setting up there is we're giving so many options to the narrators participating, as well as to each other, And so I want to know what everyone else is teaching and how they're teaching it, because I want to learn. I want to learn from them as well too. I'm looking forward to getting together and spending that time. And thank you for having me and giving me some space to work on down the river.
Absolutely, it's been a true delight. I really appreciate your time, Neil. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Starving Artist No More podcast. I value each and every one of you and so appreciate that you choose to spend your time here with me. I hope this episode gave you some hope for your own creative journey and also gave you some practical ideas about how you can foster sustainable creativity in your artistic business. If you found today's episode helpful and informative, don't forget to subscribe using your podcast player of choice so that you'll always stay aware of future episodes. And I would very much appreciate any ratings and reviews you leave for me. Especially ratings and reviews on Spotify and Apple Podcasts are super helpful in allowing new listeners to find this creative little corner of the podcast world. If you have a creative friend or colleague who you think would be interested in today's episode, or any episode of this podcast, please share it with them. Sharing is caring. A huge thank you today to Neil Helligers for taking time out of his busy schedule to share his experience and insight. And another huge thank you to my husband, Arturo Araya, who handled all the editing of this podcast and made sure it would sound good when you listened to it. If you have any questions or comments for me, or if you'd like more information about the Thriving Narrators Retreat that's taking place in August 2024 in Cincinnati, visit my website, Starving Artist No More, where you can learn more about me, the coaching programs I offer, the upcoming retreat, and where you can reach out to me via the contact form. I'd love to hear from you. The creative decisions you make in your work truly can support and positively influence the business side of your activities. And as you make sustainable business decisions, they can support and positively influence your creativity and your artistic process. As Neil described from his own creative journey, when you allow your creative inspiration to drive you to learn new artistic techniques, and then use that information to make sustainable and supportive business decisions, you will drive further creative inspiration. Working in your creative and financial sweet spot spurs a beautiful cycle of sustainable creativity. I can't wait to see what you create.